A very good evening to everyone. I, on behalf of Forum for Democracy, welcome all the participants and faculties of Mata Sundari College, Delhi University, to the day one of the certificate course on gender studies, which is being conducted by Forum for Democracy in collaboration with Department of Political Science and Internal Quality Assurance Cell, Mata Sundari College, Delhi University. I am Anjali Chahel, associated with Forum for Democracy as an advisor. Forum for Democracy is a not-for-profit and independent non-governmental trust based out of Delhi. Its mission is to help promote the dignity and betterment of citizens in a democracy. Forum for Democracy undertakes activities with an aim to help underprivileged children, women, senior citizens, and youth. We at FFD are committed to disseminating knowledge and information in the area of gender studies to the youth of the country through our flagship community programs as well as academic endeavors with students at multiple levels. Along these lines, the aim of this gender studies course will be to introduce an interdisciplinary approach to topics like sexuality, identity, race, community representation, etc. through the lens of a gendered approach. We have organized different sessions for students every day from 1st to 12th November, covering myriad topics on gender and sexuality. We are honored to have some really experienced resource persons, academicians, practitioners for each session who will be engaging with the students. Today, we'll be covering the gender and human rights perspective. So I'm going to skip the introduction because I don't want to keep you waiting, ma'am. There is a set of instructions and protocols for the students. Please keep your audio on mute until you want to speak. This will help limit background noise. If you would like to speak or answer any question, use the raise hand feature. After that, we shall ask you to unmute yourself. If you would like to use the chat box, please use it carefully as it is a public forum and a record of the chat is kept and archived. Please be an active participant. Your questions shall be taken at the end of each lecture, and please make maximum use of this learning exercise. So today we have with us Professor Bulbul Dahar James, ma'am. She has been part of the Department of Political Science, Jamia Millia Islamia, since 1998. Previously, she was positioned as Honorary Director at Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies. Her area expertise range from gender and empowerment, political economy and governance, human rights, and African studies. She is a member of many national and international academic and professional organizations, more notably the Fulbright Commission in India, US India Educational Foundation, and Association of British Scholars, British Council. Her wide-ranging expertise and various publications cover topics like human rights, women empowerment, crime against women, political economy, and governance and development. Now, I would like to invite Professor Bulbul Dahar James, ma'am, to begin the course with the introductory lecture on human rights from a gendered perspective. Over to you, ma'am. Professor Bulbul, ma'am.
Sorry. I'd switch it off because of background noise. Essentially, this was a tall order putting human rights and gender together. So I've just tried to, kind of give you a framework, larger framework on this. And we'll take, questions and comments later. I've also tried to make it, Anjali suggested that I make it very basic. So I'm just introducing certain themes. And I'm sure a lot of them are going to be taken forth in, I saw the larger format of your thing, of your entire workshop. So I'm sure that's going to be taken up in the latter sessions. What I would start with is, a human rights framework, and most of you would be familiar with it, but yet I want to put it into perspective and then look at gender. I'm focusing on gender as a human right. So, and not just as women's rights from a perspective. So I'm just going to share screen and put this forth out. But broadly, when I'm looking at human rights, and I really wanted to put this in perspective in terms of the larger structure of human rights, and I don't know how familiar you are with that. And in this sense, we are looking at, basic entitlements that belong to all of us, which are human rights. So we're looking at them in terms of nobody can take these rights away from us, and hence they are inalienable. Beyond that, there are simply because we are human beings. So the largest segment of rights, and I want to put this in perspective, a lot of political science students will be aware of it. But in terms of rights, which, you know, when we look at the concept of right, it comes from the time of ancient Greece to adherence of values and reason. So it was more rights were something which were in terms of reasonable. These were values. There was a morality also attached to it. In medieval times, the morality became the predominant, factor, where the author of rights was God, or the moral conduct which was prescribed for that human beings should follow became something that were human rights. In this sense, we were looking at rights as conflicting claims from the 18th century onwards, where civil rights were seen, where rights are conflicting claims between the individual and the state. So individual and state became central to a notion of, a perspective that we were looking at, to a notion of rights per se. By 19th century, it was more political rights, and 20th century, social and economic came into being. And here we look at the concept of natural rights, and the natural rights which actually predominated as something which was central to the concept of, looking at ethical, political reasoning. And for people who've, from political science background, would be aware that this was something which was part of, the social contractarians, Hobbes, Locke, American Revolution. All these American and the French revolutions emphasize the concept of natural rights. And I'm putting here man because the notion was not gender neutral at this point in time. So it's only recent theories which have tended to abandon this express reference to God as the author of rights, that it's not rights given to us by God, but they are more a notion of something which is natural. And here's where we come to the concept of, rights, where we look at Hofield, which is who was really somebody who was writing in the interwar period. And he looked at this in terms of liberties, claims, immunities, and powers. And then we had rights as best self, as we say. And this was really struggle of human civilization were looked at in this concept of best self, or we could only be best selves if we had rights. And Lasky, Barker, and a lot of them, propagating these ideas, we had the context of these rights were derived from struggles of human civilization. So real heroes and heroines, Lenin, Mao, Galileo, Fidel Castro, all these became part of this, including Mahashweta Devi, Medha Patkar, if you like, even mythical like Spartacus or Robin Hood were part of this concept of, that rights were needed for us to be our best self. And then we had rights as social justice. This is a concept that Dworkin really evolved, where rights as trumps. And he spoke about that this sets limits on the state action whenever it encroaches upon the individual's protected sphere. So how the individual saw those rights were in terms of how the state allowed it to remain. So social justice was a concept that was, emerging in all these kind of theories that emerged at that point in time. And then you had contemporary debates in terms of procedural and substantive justice. And this was kind of codified, if you like, in pure procedural justice, as Rawls looked at it, John Rawls, who spoke about it in terms of having just distribution of primary goods, which include rights, liberties, powers, opportunities, income, wealth, all of these. The distribution principle, there was something which was looked at as well in terms of equal liberty, fair equality of opportunity, and the difference principle. All of this became something which was singularly regarded as something central to the concept of rights. I want to jump straight onto the international human rights kind of system, which is looked at, when we look at human rights, we're looking at the international human rights system, which is not to say that the human rights started with an international human rights system or the United Nations. They were there. All of us have rights, and human rights, when we are born, in fact, even before we are born, because the fetus also has a right. But putting it into an international perspective, we want to look at this in terms of the contextual dimension of history, politics, philosophy, which gives it rights, laws, which are a mechanism through which we have to look at this and to practice it, to apply it, and the monitoring mechanism through the courts and the commissions, and safeguarding through constitution, international regional norms, treaties, etc. of human rights. I want to jump straight on to American Declaration of Human Rights, which is pretty central to what is looked at, a lot of revolutions which deal with rights, where it says that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, again, it's not gender neutral, are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, amongst which are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And then you had the French Revolution, which similarly spoke about liberty, equality, and fraternity. So we have human rights as a system of international standard for civilization. Became how civilized a country or a nation was dependent upon what was their human rights record. Human rights were considered universal, indivisible, interdependent. So we're looking at all of these in terms of the rights and the way they have evolved very quickly. The first generation, and when we are looking at the generation of rights, we have to see them, in fact, in the context of liberty, equality, fraternity, the dictate of the French Revolution. And libertaire, or the first generation, looked at civil and political liberty. The second generation was equality, which is social, economic, and cultural in nature. The third generation were, till recently, the last generation of rights, which were regarded as solidarity or fraternity rights. So you have a whole lot of new generation of rights within that, in terms of gender rights, which is what we're going to do just now, elderly, child, a whole lot of other areas. And now we have a fourth generation of human rights in terms of information and information technology, biotechnology, etc., that we are going to look at. And central to this codified kind of a notion becomes the UDHR, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948 by the UN Charter. And its preamble actually recognized inherent dignity and equality and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. So we are looking at this largely in terms of, the UN framework, but rights are there as the larger scenario as well, because you could have rights against the state or the system as well. So you could address that issue. And today, when we are looking at rights, moving on from the Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals, where they are central factor of, the complexion of human rights. And as you can see in the Sustainable Development Goals, a lot of these deal with gender, whether it's gender equality, whether it's good health and well-being, in terms of hunger, all of these are issues which are related directly to equality when we are looking at rights, and equality in the sense of gender as well. So I want to jump straight on to gender. And the first thing we need to know about gender is that it is not the same as sex. Can I be heard so far, and is that fine?
Yes, ma'am, please go on.
Okay. So in this, in the context of looking at equality and carrying forth the human rights perspective and the rights perspective, the Constitution guarantees absolute freedom and equality to all in respect of sex, race, caste, socioeconomic differences, etc. So there's no, in the legal framework, there's no inequality built in there. But I want to emphasize here that somewhere along the line, it's not just this legal framework which becomes significant, and we will look at fundamental rights or directive principles. It is largely the culture and society which defines how we as men, women, and others, when we look at it, operate in this. What are the spaces? What are the boundaries that we have? And this is where I want to, take a very simplistic, but yet a very basic notion of gender, which we need to be clear about. There is a code of conduct and rules that culture and society is very latently providing to all of us in how we behave, how we don't behave, and I'm going to deconstruct this further as we look at it. So it's important for us to understand that, to be able to actually practice and, kind of optimize on what is legally given to us. So we are looking at challenges and opportunities in societies like ours, especially today in COVID times and pandemic times, for them to unfold in new directions. This is happening in different ways. And in this, the central notion I want to put in terms of culture and society defining it, the space and boundaries, is patriarchy. Patriarchy, ya Pitrasatta, which is a form of social organization in which man heads and controls the family unit. What he does also is control large social and working groups as well as government. But I want to emphasize here, patriarchy is not male domination, which is very often, a word synonymously used with patriarchy, that it is male domination. It is the domination of male values in society, whereby male values which are perpetuated by women more than men in larger sense of the term. So we are looking at perpetuation or the creation of patriarchy. Pitra Satta jo, Nani, Dadi, Ma, Behen, all of us operate in this system, fathers, mothers, but more women more than men are perpetuating it. It is also, patriarchy also defines a family or a society in which authority is vested in the male, through whom descent and inheritance are traced, which is also the reason why we have things like female feticide, because the boy becomes central to that thing, which is not to say that the boy also is not exploited or impacted by patriarchy or notions of patriarchy. And how does patriarchy operate or influence on, what are the influences on women? And broadly, when we look at it, it is basically control over her body in larger sense of the term. And a lot of this is part of the sustainable development goals that I had put in there as well. Over mobility. Mobility is treated like a sine qua non for security of women, that if you want to be secure, if you don't want to address issues of harassment and other things, then do not be that mobile or keep your timings in a way. And very often patriarchy determines this for women more than men. In fact, definitely for women. Wealth and property, again, is a notion which influences, how it influences women is in terms of not giving them equal opportunities. And even when equal opportunities are given in terms of legal rights, because now we have property rights, which women have equally with men, with boys, yet, when it comes to filing a case or doing anything like that, it's very rare that girls would actually do that against their father or brother or whoever. Health, again, is a major detrimental thing where women are concerned, because their health comes last. And this is something that women do to themselves. And that's also part of the larger patriarchal scenario, whether they eat the last, nutritional value is the least that they get. And in all other ways where health parameters, maternal health in terms through pregnancy, and adolescence, and a whole lot of issues which have been taken up through times of periods, that whole thing has been taken up in various ways and being addressed. Now, education and unemployment ordinarily is considered, it's very equal and we are there and the girls actually top, but the dropout rate is so much more. Employment, and it's very sad, and I want to take simple examples like when I'm taking a session for sexual harassment act and trying to tell whether it's for corporates or government bodies, the corporates very often come up and tell me that, oh ma'am, we recognize now that this harassment is something which is really a problem. The easiest thing for us to do is that we don't employ women. That's how women get impacted by this whole thing as well. So if you make a law which is supposed to be helping the women, it actually could be detrimental as well. And education simply is something which has been provided, again, legally, all equality is at place. But when it comes to the crunch, it's not really equality in that sense of the term, because we have the dropout rate is so much more in bodies, in very, very empowered bodies also. We have, for instance, for 1 Million Rising Against Violence, we have a group working with us who come from IIT Delhi, who call themselves Three. And you won't believe it, there's not a single woman in that group. And they're actually, they're working for this against violence. And when we asked them, they said, we have very few girls in our batch. And we had, in fact, the toppers from our batch were girls as well. And slowly over the second year and third year, they've dropped out. And a lot of them who are there will not be allowed to come because of the late hours. So we actually working under, even in such professions and, you know, segments of technical education, you have this kind of a discrimination. Somewhere along the line, we do see this as, something which is impacting the way women come into society at large. What I'm dealing with is not theoretical issues. I want to look at it practically, and hopefully the theoretical thing will be deconstructed in the next sessions that we have. Patriarchy also is, to me, its influence on women is in terms of participation in decision making, where women are not there in participation in decision making bodies. So you have the title of a book by Indira Jaising, who's drafted the Domestic Violence Act, where she speaks about, the title of that book is Women's Lives and Men's Laws. It's literally like that. When the laws are made by the men, when you don't have participation of women in those decision-making bodies for the laws to be made there, naturally the laws are going to be skewed. And even now, tokenism in decision-making bodies is brought in, that you have to get in one woman somewhere along the line. It's not something which is as a healthy balance that is meant to be achieved. But the most debilitating impact of patriarchal control and influence on women is really autonomy and self-esteem, which is something which has often been seen as, practically seen. You can see that how women themselves, lose the confidence to be able to do because of being put down in various ways. And this might be seen as something which is a very normal thing, but really it has a debilitating impact. And that when your self-esteem goes down, the confidence to be able to go out, and I've seen this in a lot of quarters because we work with adolescent girls, and in all of these issues, you can see how over a period of time they regard, becoming subservient to the system completely. We can see this in acid throwing. We can see this in, any of the rape or harassment cases where the women tend to blame themselves, that guilt over it. So what is it we are looking at here? We need to move beyond women to look at this dichotomy of sex and gender. And in the first slide, we said that the first thing we need to know about gender is that it's not the same as sex. There's not even, for people who are from Hindi, for instance, or Hindustani or any other language here, there's no term for gender. So each time we are looking at it, we are, really speaking about sex or gender interchangeably, but we need to understand that sex, as we all know, is biologically determined, or was till, you could have technology brought in an intervention in this as well. It's universal, or was, and it's given and unchanging, but we'll take this as a given at this point in time. And of course, the problem is not with sex, which is something that one might be born with, which is biologically determined, which could be universal and, question. It is really gender, which you, me, all of us in society are constructing as fathers, mothers, as friends around us, as peers, as grandparents, as a larger societal setup. We construct gender. We are constructing that girl. We are constructing that boy with complex cultural elements going into the construction. It's acquired, it varies within cultures and in different cultures. And then you have the outcome in terms of the kind of media perception of it is in terms of, the films that we see. And here you have this popular film hero, Salman Khan, whose famous dialogue of "Pyar se de rahe hain, rakh lo, warna thappad maar ke bhi de sakte hain." The whole notion of entitlement, of, even the quotient of love or an emotion being treated with a kind of a patriarchal entitlement, a kind of a male entitlement. And I want to take this concept further, the Thappad concept further, into Thappad, the film Thappad, where Tapasi Panu, a stay-at-home wife, Amu in the film, is very devoted to her husband. It's a traditional couple. He has a traditional couple that we're all familiar with, where, it's very normal. He's, she's very devoted to him. He has a busy career. She makes his dreams her own. While he labors over office assignments, she labors over his every need, serving him meals, chasing him out the car with his wallet, giving him coffee there, in a travel mug, feeding him his unfinished breakfast, caring for his elderly mother, maintaining guests, entertaining home. All this she's doing, and he's also taking care of her. In the sense, they have a very good kind of a rapport till he gives her that one slap one day in a stressed kind of an environment. So Amrita Akka Amu, which is Tapasi Panu, is the protagonist. And there's this conviction of the entire film, the way it is drawn, in the storyline that is drawn, that it is even one spousal abuse is once too many. So ostensibly, they're a happy couple, where Tanu switches off after that single slap that most people can't understand. They said, how does one slap, ek thappad to kuch nahi hota hai. But as and how the man also puts it, he says, shit happens, it happens, people move on. He tells her. She's very upset about it. And you have this whole notion of, how do you look at this perception? But what really comes out, and why I'm taking this film, is that how patriarchy is deconstructed through various people who come into Amu's life, who are in Amu's life, whether it's her husband, to whom she becomes indifferent after that slap and decides that, then she looks at all the things she's been, not the physical slap, but the way she's been slapped by being subverted, and all her, dreams and all her kind of goals in life have been subverted, and she's allowed that to happen. Then you see her mother, Ratna Pathak Shah, as the mother, who evolves during the course of the story, who tells her bardasht karna padta hai. Patriarchy is deconstructed through that, the mother. Then you have the father, Kumud Mishra, who is very, very feminist when it comes to his daughter. But when he realizes, and how the film evolves later, how he is actually so patriarchal has been towards his wife. He could have, throttled her desires in a minute without really realizing it. And he's the most likable of the characters. Then Tanvi Azmi as a silent, suffering mother-in-law who wouldn't speak up. Then you have the maid, Geetika Vaidya, who comes up and who has a miserable life, where her husband bashes her up every day, drinks, and she's used to it. And then she sees this happening in another class. So the class factor, brought into gender here when we are looking at that. So various shades of the men also emerge, where the husband, he's kind to the household help, to Geetika Vaidya, but thinks nothing of ordering his wife around like a junior at work. So he doesn't have horns on his head. He's just another entitled jerk who's blinded by his male privilege. So the notion of male privilege, it in fact, shows how each of the men could react in different ways. You could be patriarchal in a sense, and you could move beyond that. So what are we looking at? We're looking at something which is so imbibed in us in different ways, where we're looking at the construction of gender in this kind of an unbalanced way, which is what I want to show you in a short film that, which is located in outer London, in fact, and a few years old. I want to put this in because very often it's assumed patriarchy is a very South Asian concept. I want to emphasize here, no, it isn't. It is something which is universal in a sense, and we have to unravel that slowly, and all of us have to make an effort towards changing it. We really have to experience it. So I hope the video really comes in. So I want to.
This afternoon, we're going to draw people doing different jobs. And the first job we're going to draw is firefighter.
Have a think in your head what a firefighter looks like.
What's your firefighter called?
Mine's called Firefighter Gary. Firefighter Stan. Firefighter Simon. He's big and strong. He's like
That's brilliant, isn't it? Next, we're going to draw a surgeon. Have you thought of the name for your surgeon?
Jim Bob. He's a brain surgeon. I think he would wear a stethoscope. He gives you medicine. That's his ambulance.
Okay, next we're going to draw a fighter pilot.
This is his jet plane. He rescues people. He likes to do stunts in the air.
Okay, now who would like to meet these people for real?
When you went there dressed up.
My name's Tamsin and I'm a surgeon in the NHS.
My name's Lauren and I'm a pilot in the Royal Air Force.
My name's Lucy. I'm a firefighter in the London Fire Brigade.
So who wants to know how to do an operation?
Rip it up.
Try my stethoscope.
We'll put this in here. There you go. Now you've got the fighter pilot.
So can you hear this? Can you hear that? It's really good. Yeah.
So that was a film. You can see how the reactions of these little children, which is where gender stereotypes have already been evolved, where they can't perceive. You have 6 or 7 out of those children who actually identify these professions as women. And this is something which is so inbuilt in the psyche, which is something we really need to do something about. And it's a latent kind of a patriarchy which really needs to be looked at, which is developing or building these kind of stereotypes. And when we look at these, it becomes something, and this is something, these are educated, empowered groups, yet we would have latent elements within us, which still look at male being the independent, powerful, competent, logical, and then you have the reverse for the women, whether they're dependent, weak, incompetent, emotional, implementers, and so on and so forth. So the whole notion of gender and the roles that, you know, one is looking at is sex, which is associated with reproduction. And this is a very interesting concept, and this is something that over a period of time, I see this as being challenged by technology, where you have reproduction, which, you know, for the feminist notion, the whole notion of reproduction or the notion of productive was being questioned because women were not regarded as productive. So reproductive was unproductive in a sense of the term. And that today, I mean, I'll deal with this later, but basically it is sex is associated with reproduction where women can reproduce and men can't. And gender is assigned to individual on socially determined characteristics, stereotypes that we are creating through patriarchy, through various measures, ideologies, through values, attitudes, beliefs, and practices. They're constantly doing this. And this is something which we need to, you know, perceive in our everyday kind of objectification, which we allow to happen, you know, in various ways, what we see in these larger terms. But what I really want to focus on, because there's an understanding and a comprehension that women are, you know, subjugated and are impacted by patriarchy, but it is also men, in fact, perhaps boys, in various ways who are more subjugated or who are more, you know, impacted by patriarchy in terms of masculinity. And herein Cornell, Lee, and others, Carrigan, have actually looked at male sex roles in literature, multiple masculinities, power relations in various ways, but mostly hegemonic masculinity and emphasized femininity, which becomes a very, very central kind of a concept in the larger sense of the term. And here you see, you know, the kind of gender qualities that are brought in, and I'm saying gender here, not sex qualities, looks at, if I were to ask you by a show of hands, which you can't do at this point in time, most would agree that women are more kind-hearted, men are more aggressive, women are more emotional, you know, stereotypical statements in terms of qualities which women are supposed to have in a sense of a term, and so do men. This kind of stereotypical notion or the gender qualities that we are speaking about actually impacts men in, we all know how it impacts women, because, you know, we've already dealt with how patriarchy impacts women. I want to focus on what it does to men who are expected to be strong, the providers, leaders, confident, tough, aggressive, so on and so forth. Man, he doesn't feel the pain. Mard ko dard nahi hota. All those notions are brought in. Something which is so well drawn out in this absolutely obnoxious film, obnoxious celebration of toxic masculinity that we saw in terms of Kabir Singh. And a lot of you girls would have seen it. I don't know what your opinion is on it. You know, this did crores of business, much more than a film like Thappad, or even perhaps a lot of times I'm asked, why didn't you take up, you know, Queen as an example of, you know, looking at a notion. Here you have Kabir Singh, who's an abuser of women, who's our main protagonist, who's a bully, who's an insensitive lout, alcoholic. He mouths off the dean proprietarily, stakes his claim on the girl he stares at, bullies anyone in his path as he moves her into the boys' hostel. He slaps the heroine, who knows, and tells her, who knows you in college? Kaun janta hai tumko college mein? Your identity is you're my girl. So whole notion of toxic masculinity and this hegemonic masculinity is drawn into this notion of Kabir Singh, which we are seeing every day. And I saw it in a hall, and I can't tell you the way, the time, the applause was coming in was absolutely horrific. So very often I'm, you know, told that it's like misogyny seems to be part of our psyche, and we need to look at this in terms of we are creating through patriarchy a kind of an aggressive masculinity. This aggressive masculinity, which now we have young girls here, and I'm sure you're familiar with the boys' locker room, you know, WhatsApp group that was created, and how it promoted. And this was a WhatsApp group of young, and very often we treat Kabir Singh kind of a situation, or others, even as I'm going to do this, the Nirbhaya rapists as being something which is a semi-urban, rural, uneducated phenomena. But the boys' locker room opened our eyes, and this was early on with the COVID-19, with the pandemic coming in, sometime in March, April, when it came to light, how this boys' locker room, a group of boys, WhatsApp group, was actually fantasizing about raping their own classmates. It's in a public school in Delhi, so it's not something that we are not familiar with. And we really need to look at this and think about how quickly in life can we start talking about sex, about consent, about boundaries, about equality with children, with teenagers, with young adults. And as that film, you know, Mullen Lowen film that I showed, short film that I showed, it's very early on that these kind of perceptions are imprinted in the young minds. And we need to do that pretty soon. So where Nirbhaya kind of accused and who finally got, you know, were hung, are glaring examples of how juveniles become engaged in a repugnant kind of sexual violence. It's not even sexual violence, it's just horrific. And we are often justify it as being something which is a phenomena which, you know, they haven't been taught. But boys' locker room manifests that this violence, indeed masculinity, exists freely in the imagination of our youth. We really need to, as faculty, as students, as the generation next, to really do something about it in various ways, whether it's a clear no, whether it's in terms of bringing about that change. There's a culture of macho man, you know, which is translated to broad chest, loud voice, aggression, violence, dominating, you know, notions which earlier we would say, you know, say ki aap, जो dialogue बोले जाते थे कि औरत को काबू में भी नहीं रख सकते हो, you know, all that kind of a thing is brought in today when we are looking at it. Gentleman has become passé. The notion of gentleman is seen as a sissy. Now it's not masculine enough. So we're really moving into an era of something which is manifest as toxic masculinity. It's so inbuilt, it's latent in us, where the man can never be a victim. He has to be a man. Toxic or masculinity is essential. Violence is essential. Emotions have to be suppressed. You know, the whole notion of masculinity has, you know, been kind of overlooked. The fact that patriarchy is actually constantly replicating this. And we have studies which have been done of adolescent boys where they have been abused in major ways as children and haven't been able to speak up because they were boys. They couldn't do anything about it. They had to really, create a notion of being the superior ones. And they had the burden of being the breadwinners, in a sense. They had the burden of being, bigger and bigger idea of masculinity, which shifted to dominating with violence. So boys' locker room really spoke about let's rape her, which was a wishful fantasy. It was connecting sex with violence, not some kind of orgasmic pleasure which happens harmoniously. And that's the sad part. So you have, the problem was that the pleasure was not coming from sex. It was coming from the violence that was involved in it. So masculinity was based on one person's pleasure, not both persons' pleasure. Consent was a, sadly absent stream there. So the sad misconceived reality is this emerged was that sex is a one-way process. It's a one-way stream, which it isn't. And this really, brought us to a notion of prescriptive masculine stereotypes, which in a sense helped to share, a notion of how gender hierarchy is ensured by men when men and boys are trained and reinforced for behavior that keeps their status high. We are trying to do that as a society. We are constantly doing that as a society. We are constantly trying to create notions which are regarded as, leadership notions, decision-making, dominance, achievement orientation. All these become something which are very, very central to the male model that we are building. We will not allow our boys to be different in that sense. We might let the girls be. We need to talk about all these notions. And if something like, an incident like Nirbhaya or Boys Locker Room reinforces the fears of families that girls are at risk of violence and sexual predation on the streets, today that sexual predation with Boys Locker Room is on the internet also. You have social media platforms where there is, harassment happening. So the whole patriarchal notion becomes that girls need to be kept safe, they need their freedom. The best way to keep them safe cannot be by telling girls when they should return home, where they should not go, or by not giving them smartphones or not allowing them to wear jeans and, stuff like that, which is constantly a constant that we are looking at in this whole notion of, this whole notion of making a difference and giving security to the girls because they cannot be mobile. We really do need to speak about, cyberbullying, peer pressure, consent, understanding boundaries. And boundaries are a very significant thing that, in the third slide, I told you about culture and society defining the boundaries. Pleasure of the equal, consensual, welcome sex rather than anything else. So we need to build these kind of models of, consent in a sense. So, and both a child when it's born, it doesn't matter if it's a girl or a boy. However, the society is putting a premium on the boy. And that premium is impacting the boy also negatively. It's not as if, it's just by creating that domination syndrome, by letting him not express his emotions. Boys can't cry. They need to be the strong ones. Somehow, by the time they are in their teens, the difference becomes sharper, and girls are often told that they should not, what they should not do, what they should be careful about, and so on and so forth. So we really need to look at a notion where girls are getting empowered. Today, boys need to get empowered. They need to be empowered enough to deal with the girls' empowerment. Stricter laws, penalties cannot be the only way to keep women and girls safe. It's important for us to recognize that. And while the safety of the girls and women is a valid societal concern, we need to be equally concerned about what happens to boys and men in this changing world. Laws and punishment are necessary, but how can we really say that their deterrent value can be seen? Because this is a problem. Despite the capital punishment given to the Nirbhaya rapists, we've had a lot of rape cases, and you can see the case. From Hathras, we've had another one and another one, and the way it's emerged. It's really a case of, kind of gender-related expectation we are looking at. I won't go into it. We are short of time because I do want to end with, so violence is not something which, you know, I've been building on, is not a physical or a biological act. It is located in our social and cultural context. It is located in the fact of the stereotypes of masculine stereotypes and feminine stereotypes being created, where, you know, you're not a man enough if he's not masculine. And prescriptive feminine stereotypes are traditional supporting, nurturing roles, you know, being a mother. The stereotypes are descriptive and prescriptive in what ought to be, how the men and boys need to be. And this, in a sense, is something which is a constant that we are looking at. And in all of this, I want to go back to consent in terms of tu haan kar ya na kar, tu hai meri Kiran. That whole notion of, very often I'm told that this is, ma'am, he was a psychopath, but there are very many psychopaths in society somewhere latent in us. And we are creating those psychopaths through the patriarchal notions that we are building in. You know, you can see that in acid attacks, you can see that in the harassment that is happening, you can see that in the rapes, and so on and so forth. We really are not looking at prescriptive elements in terms and the laws that are in place that are very, very many. It's not as if they are less. And this is something that, you know, and the amount of acts we have to safeguard women could not have been, you know, any more than we already have in our constitution. It's really something which is, it's a very, very well laid out constitution. What we really need to do is have a thinking on this. We need to have a cognitive dissonance in making a difference in terms of how we behave and how we can change that. But most importantly, and I can't do a gender session without really touching on this, we need to move beyond this gender binary. It is not just social identity of men and women, but it's trans people as well. So we need to look at, go beyond gender, beyond this binary of men and women, to look at gender in terms of sexual orientation, lesbian, gay, bisexual, asexual, heterosexual, pansexual, or identity in terms of transgender, transsexual, transvestite, intersex, gender fluid, so on and so forth, gender non-binary, and so on and so forth. This is something which is to do with spaces that each of which operates. Space, again, is a very feminist concept, and we spoke about culture and society defining the space. And feminist social scientists have emphasized the significance of space, not just as being physical, economic, socio-cultural, political, mental, in terms of intra-household dynamics. So these spaces vary, and we have to, you know, take that decision in what sense this can be. So spaces are gendered, systems are gendered. In the gendered systems and spaces, we have work is gendered, political systems are gendered, work is gendered in the sense of men usually do paid work outside the home, while women do paid work outside and unpaid work inside the home. We have political systems, or domestic work is seen as women's work and outside work is seen as men's work. Political systems are gendered when you normally had men dominating all the formal systems and informal systems being for women. So hard portfolios ordinarily went to the men. Finance, defense has only recently been given to women. While women ministers had soft portfolios, education, family planning, health, etc. Spaces are gendered. You know, men occupy or predominant public spaces, while women occupy private spaces. Marketplace is male, while kitchen is female. So we have this whole patriarchal notion which is constantly building on a vicious circle of hegemonic masculinity, gendered socialization which takes place, a kind of a power inequality, and a social reproduction of patriarchy constantly happening. So here it's not, we're really not looking at, you know, gender differences being the problem. It's not the sex differences or gender differences being the problem. The problem is the inequality which we are putting, where gender inequality puts women in a disadvantageous position vis-a-vis men. It puts men in a disadvantageous position vis-a-vis women. It's puts the trans people, LGBTQI++, whatever, in the most disadvantageous positions where spaces are determined for them as well. You know, they need to be in that terrain of sex work. They need not to be seen. They can be begging. And, you know, that whole thing is latently created. We really do need to, you know, kind of build this into a notion of constructing equality, and I'm reaching the end. And we need to deconstruct, a whole lot of structures which are gendered, and we've spoken about these systems which are gendered, stereotypes which we are constantly gendering, and which is not a binary into male, female, and trans. And the trans are the most subjugated under this kind of a scenario. Gender, of course, is something which is deconstructed constantly. We need to, build on or construct equality. We need to construct consent. So this is my world of expectations, my world of do's and don'ts, of belonging, of relationships that are intimate, demanding, compulsive, and controlling. These multiple roles and relationships push and pull me in many directions. I could be a man, woman, trans person, anybody, often lose touch with my being, my process of becoming, my search to discover equations in relationships and well-being. I often lose touch with my space, but most importantly, I often lose touch with my rhythm with myself. And that, to me, is the most basic kind of debilitating impact that it has. We need to look at gender beyond that. Thank you all for your participation and patience.
Thank you so much, Professor Buzzel ma'am, for such an informative and relevant introduction to the topic of gender as a human right, and making us understand how patriarchy gets deconstructed in multiple ways. So now we can move on to the question and answer round. Students have already been asking questions. All right, I'll request the students, I will call you one by one. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. Dhwani, are you here? Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good evening, ma'am. Dhwani this side. I am a second year student of political science.
Hi, Dhwani.
My question is, I have read somewhere that in India, before colonialization, women were given much respect and representation. And the wave of feminism and the civil rights for women, as we all know, started from the West only. So can we say that the patriarchy and the concept of patriarchy has majorly started from the West? Because in India, women have been frontline warriors also, be it independence or fighting for their own rights. Can we say that?
Yes, Dhwani, in a sense you can say that, but when you're talking about equality and there being, yes, you're right, but that's the early Vedic period where you had women actually who were part of the panchayats, were involved in that work as well. But it has been over a period of time where you have an intersection of caste, you have an intersection of class and gender which has come into being. And this is something which, through the way it's developed, and you can see that in the mythologies, even the religious mythologies, wherever you're looking at them, that this is something which has been perpetuated in various ways, perhaps not on your face, because I don't want to go into religion. That's another terrain. We could look at that, but I don't want to go into it. So yes, feminism might seem like a Western concept. It might have come from the West, but it is not something new to India. And the way you're seeing it today, and your generation can see how we are in different ways trying to get out of it, but it is still there. It is still there in the choices we are making, or the real choices we are not able to make. So this is something you're going to be faced with. You're young, and this is something you're going to be faced with. And I took up these instances which, the media kind of mirrored, were societal dimensions, which we see in everyday examples of it. You can see acid throwing still happen. You can see voyeurism. You can see, harassment at various levels. The idea of consent not being so simple. And that's why so many acts need to be in place. But somewhere we also need to deconstruct this amongst ourselves and understand that that equality needs to come in. We need to understand that boys are equally under the, suppressed by patriarchy. And somewhere consent of both is so significant, which means you have to be, a lot of sexual harassment cases that we get, in fact, the girl has not been clear enough, because under patriarchy, she's supposed to be shy. She's not supposed to speak up. And she thinks by keeping quiet, it will go away. It doesn't go away. In fact, it gets repeated, and it gets something that it's taken as being hasi to hasi kind of a notion. You know, all these become part of that larger notion. So, and we are perpetuating it as a society. You know, we could be doing it in terms of as sisters, mothers, brothers, anybody, you know, in that larger set. So yes, I mean, let's not be, you know, nationalistic about it and say that we had this. I'm sorry, we do. And in the kind of setup that we are living today, we are accused of being, you know, having a violation of women is so enormous that something which we need to address and make a difference and a change therein. We need to pick up the good things, you know, from all the mythology that we are looking at as well, and not just look at it as something as being something that, you know, we already had it and now it's happened. But let's face it, it is the status quo today. So how do we make that change? How do you think, Dhwani, we can make that change? Do you not see that there's inequality in society? Do you know, it angers one. And as a girls' college, this is something that you probably don't experience, but come on, we're living in a setup where we are seeing and hearing about this every day. So we do need to do something about it. We also need to understand that the boys are also under pressure, but I think we're going on with only Dhwani, the other questions. I don't know if I answered your question, Dhwani, but I don't think it was a question in that sense of the term. So we'll take it as being addressed, but yeah.
Okay.
Dhwani is looking very angry.
No, ma'am. I'm glad you answered.
Thank you, Dhwani. Thank you, ma'am. Moving on, Anshita Jain also had a question earlier. Anshita, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi, Anshita.
Hello, ma'am.
It's stuck to Dhwani's picture just now. So I don't know if there's a problem with my thing. And it's a static picture, but go on. Yeah, I can hear you fine, Anjali. So please.
Okay, please go ahead with your question, Anshita.
Ma'am, my question is, what is the difference between gender equity and gender equality?
Okay, I didn't want to go into it because we have stuff like, and I'm sure your sessions are going to do further on, because they will talk about gender mainstreaming, they'll talk about equality and equity in other sense of the term, but from the human rights perspective also, this is something which we need to talk about in terms of distribution. So it's a long thing. I don't want to go into it just now. So anything else, but of course, it's got to do with the distribution that we are speaking about. Okay.
Anyway, my question is about the fact that, like in the beginning, when you mentioned the gender binary, you mentioned this male and female, but you made a separate section for homosexuality and the transgenders.
Okay.
I personally kind of found it problematic, considering the fact that we are a supposedly liberal forum, and we creating a different section from them is, in a sense, like we are segregating them as others already by creating such a binary.
Yeah, I think that's very well taken, because the intention was not to segregate it at all. Ordinarily, we should put that right in the beginning, but I did want to do patriarchy first to begin with, because, you know, I want to deal with the way gender is looked at. Very often, you don't even have issues of masculinity which get discussed. And that is something I wanted to bring in. And the idea of looking at a binary, or understanding that it's not just a binary and one needs to look beyond that, is something that I wanted to incorporate. And yes, I could have done more justice to it by starting it right in the beginning, but I don't know what level this was, also one. Second, I really did need to deconstruct first, you know, looking at why patriarchy, and looking at patriarchy or the gender sex dichotomy. And the gender sex dichotomy has to start with a binary, unfortunately. So yes, your point is well taken. And the idea is not to put it as a separate section. I'm sorry if it seemed like it was a separate section. In that sense, there were 4 separate sections in it, because I was looking at human rights, then I was looking at gender sex dichotomy, and, you know, in terms of patriarchy, and then masculinity, and then trans people. The idea was to cover all of these. So yes, you have a point there.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. There's another question from Anjali Tyagi. Anjali, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, Anjali. Yeah.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask, despite having knowledge about rights and equality, people still practice gender discrimination unknowingly. Why education is not enough for them?
Anjali, I love your question. Precisely because this is something I often take up when I'm dealing with sexual harassment as well, that I have a problem in our education system. I think there is a problem there. We are not educating, we are not really bringing in gender equality. Even issues of what the previous question was regarding LGBTQ++ are not being drawn in. In fact, in very, very empowered setup, when I'm asking them, there's nobody. In fact, I ask you, is there anybody beyond girls here? Does anybody identify, and do you bring that up? No, it doesn't come in. But from the perspective of education, what really amazes me when I'm looking at sexual harassment as well, cases like, when I'm doing training workshops for the police and, lower level police constable and others. And they very often say things like, madam, wo chote chote kapde pehen ke aate hain, wo to nyota de rahe hain harassment ka. That's the notion. Jo mujhe samajh aata hai, kyunki from where he is coming from in terms of the educational background and the rural, semi-rural areas. But when I'm getting the same logic from empowered people like Tarun Tejpal, who's been accused of harassment, a Tehelka, running a Tehelka paper, or, the Terry gentleman who's been accused of sexual harassment, both of whom say the same thing. They say it in more sophisticated and subtle ways by saying, oh, she encouraged us, she was being provocative, and all this is part of the cases that bring in. So I really feel your question is so relevant. Where has education brought us? It's not changed anything for the most educated also. In fact, we are using education to kind of, misusing, abusing it to actually counter the point. And that is something worrisome. We really need to integrate this in our education systems. And as you saw in that short film, it is very young that thing needs to be brought in, and not just once. Repeated redressals need to be made. Refresher courses need to be brought in. So yes, I definitely feel education is not enough, and the nature of our education is questionable. We really need to look at it in various ways. We need to look at it for the most educated as well. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on.
Okay.
Yes, please.
No, I can see the questions here, but Nandini Dogra has something on, if she wants to say, she can herself as well.
Yes, please, Nandini, do you want to ask?
About homosexuality and gender-based human rights. She's just asking my perspective. I don't think we have the time for it. We really need to bring that in. It's not part of our educational scenario. It's not even the laws are vacillating in this. It's so worrisome when we have one court at one level decides on, giving gay rights and, stuff. And then you have another court which decides to the contrary. And it's a very worrisome thing where we are having a vacillating stance on something like that. And the kind of gender-based violence for the homosexuals, for the trans, and for others that is there is just amazing. We can't even, put a figure to this because nobody wants to do any kind of data collection on it. And there's so little, despite us having in the Aadhaar card, having a section of, male, female, other there. I'm not sure. I think it might well be being misused in a sense. So somewhere, education needs to address this, and not the education that we are speaking about, because we are still dealing with the Tarun Tejpals and the Pachauris who are coming up with that similar logic. We really need to, question that in a sense somewhere along the line and look at this from a larger perspective of human rights. But as you know, human rights are multifaceted. You could have at least two perspectives on this, which are diametrically opposite, which comes to, on any issue that we are looking at, if not many more than two. So when you talk about human rights, you're talking about agreeing to disagree also. You're talking about a factor of understanding the other perspective, not maybe accepting it, but at least understanding it. And that to me is very important.
Okay, ma'am. So Niyati also has, she has a couple of questions. Niyati, can you unmute yourself and switch on your video? And if you could just briefly ask your question. Niyati Goyal. I can't see it.
Then there's Akshita.
Akshita, yes.
And then there's Akshita and Ananya. I think they're, you know, reiterating a point. And very honestly, Ananya, Akshita, you saying, do you feel these values have been so deep-rooted that we as women have got into them in us? And how do we find a way out of this? Then Akshita says, what's your opinion on anti-abortion laws? Whenever I think about it, I'm unable to form an understanding. In fact, abortion is a very, very good example of how you could have two perspectives. Today, abortion is a major issue in the US elections as well. This is something which is taken up in a major way. And when we look at these kind of, and you're right, it's got at least two facets. You could agree from a human rights perspective of, you know, pro-life. It becomes an issue that we need to look at. From the perspective of about the women's empowerment and how we look at it, it becomes another issue. Diametrically opposite are both human rights. And this is so of most human rights, whether it's euthanasia, whether it's surrogacy, whether it is gay rights, you have at least two, you know, kind of dimensions. So yes, it's a stand that you take, you know, taking away the reproductive right of the woman and also not giving her the choice in a sense. So there is a dichotomy, and I agree. Some of the questions that you've asked me, I have to be honest, I don't have answers. We all have to seek our own answers from whichever perspective we are standing. It's how we can make that change and difference. You know, I can't set you know, I can't tell you this is an answer, because for each of us, we'll find answers in different ways. So you have to discover that. But the first thing is to understand where you are placed in that situation. So I really appreciate the questions that, you know, you've got in here. I've taken Akshita and Ananya's question. Niyati says, women who are flag bearers of patriarchal society, women themselves don't want to break the notion of toxic masculinity. I agree with what you're saying, Niyati. And that's not all women, and we can't generalize. Mother-in-law never expects son to do household chores. Being a woman, she expects daughter-in-law to do it, but she doesn't expect, okay, I agree with all of that. And I thought we've moved beyond that. I really, really appreciate the fact that, you know, you've drawn in stuff like that. Can we say, Dhwani says, can we say that patriarchy is spread from the West? I think we dealt with this, or yes, is this something, is it a new one? Noor Jahan, Prithviraj Chauhan's wife, many women hold on to their households. These examples to me are aberrations, but we need to have more of these aberrations there. And then we have,
we also have.
Why is it still a South Asian countries? Sorry, Anjali, can you read something?
No, please, go on, ma'am.
I don't know if it's been done.
No, it wasn't. You please go ahead.
Why was West able to involve? I think that's what Niyati is saying. Why was West able to evolve so much as far as women's empowerment is considered? New Zealand, a very women-friendly country. Iceland, Ireland. I think, Niyati, you're looking at what is manifestly visible. You're really not looking at beyond that and beyond the obvious ones. It's not just, the West is not that empowered as it's made out, and that short film would have shown you that little kids in London are still speaking about it. And don't go by the attire and others. Very often we make that mistake. The kind of subjugation and the kind of violence, in fact, I would happily show you if I can. If you have 2 minutes, I want to show you a universal kind of a thing on violence. Can I do that quickly? Share screen? I don't know if you have time.
Sure, ma'am, we can conclude with that. You can do that.
And that's just something which is so universal. So I'm just going to very quickly pull that out for you. It's a film made for 1 billion Rising Against Violence. And you see that?
No, ma'am. There is no.
Okay, 1 second. I don't know, this has never happened on Zoom before. I don't know why it's happening now.
Ma'am, should we take the questions in case?
Yeah, why don't you take the questions? I'm trying to open it.
All right. So
in fact, I seem to have got out of the Zoom mode in the mainframe. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so Akshita Juyal has a question. How will marriage institutions sustain in an egalitarian society? And along with that, Kriti Churani has a question. Can we say that technology has boosted up our lives, but image of women has been degraded?
Yes and no to the latter question. It's probably boosted the life. I think we'll just cut that out. I don't want to get into getting the film in, because there's a.
You can share that later with the students.
Yeah, I will do that later. And I just can't get back into it, but as long as you can hear me, it's fine. I can't even get back into the big Zoom mode. It's gone into.
It's all right, ma'am. Just leave it. You
Yeah.
can just answer these questions.
So regarding technology, I think very often we feel that our generation is more empowered, but when we do, in capacity building workshops, we do intergenerational kind of a thing on this. And we find that it hasn't, because now the woman is expected to be doing all of it because she has all these things at her disposal, which really is not helping, because anyway, you're multitasking. So I have mixed feelings on that notion. And the first question was, Anjali?
How will marriage institutions sustain
Yes.
in an egalitarian society?
Okay, so marriage is again being readdressed in a sense, but I think it can be very, very well sustained if that equality dimension is come in, because this is a fear for men as well. It's not a women's issue. And now we are talking about gay marriages. We are talking about associations beyond that. In fact, the Domestic Violence Act, the way it is drawn out, it's looking at marriage as an institution or shared relationships as being part of something which is regarded as formal and legal. So we've moved beyond that marriage notion, and it's not as if it won't be sustained. I think it can very well be sustained in a more empowering way if we can bring about that equality, if we can really create that, and that can be a yardstick somewhere without patriarchy in its negative sense. Madhukeshwar says in various, the origin of, who's brought about Manushi, which was one of the most empowering journals earlier, and now, she's on a different plane, but she put an interesting logic. She said, patriarchy by itself is not bad. It's the practice of patriarchy and the way it's perpetuated sometimes that we really need to question, because patriarchy meant that it was a patriarch, somebody who was taking care of the family. Today, we don't have that happening in various ways. In a study done of adolescent girls on the status of the report by Save the Children, along with, TISS Mumbai, and it had 8 or 12 state study. And one of the, galling, glaring statistics that emerged, whatever way in which you want to look at it, is nearly 50% of sexual abuse of adolescent girls were biological fathers. And I stay in Gurgaon, and I actually spoke to one of the fathers who proudly, with his, chest drawn square, said in crude Haryanvi to me that I have sown the seed and I'll bear the fruit. That's the kind of logic and the kind of, thinking which has gone into it, which means it's regarded as something which is normalized in that system. So we are looking at the change happening. We are looking at that happening, but somewhere along the line, also these manifestations are there. And this is not just a South Asian phenomena. This is something which is growing. And very often, if in a refresher course I'm asked, oh, the methodology must have been wrong. How can this be nearly 50%? So I ask you all, even if it's 1%, even if it's 0.5%, how sick is that? We are looking at a society where, things are changing. They're all under wraps. And the middle class is the most, worst off in that sense of the term, because you put on this facade of emancipation and you can't even mention stuff. So I think change in relationships, whether marriage as an institution or any institution, has to do with change which we have to bring about in our own equations and, in our own self and how we project that. And that's, to me, is a very, very important kind of a dimension that we really need to, we can't ignore.
Right, thank you, ma'am. We'll just take one quick last question because we've exceeded the time limit. So this is by Kaveri A. What do you think makes people believe that being a teacher is the best profession for a woman, despite it being a very involving and time-consuming profession outside the school or college premises?
So what is her question?
This is a question that what do you think, what makes people believe the mindset that being a teacher is the best suited profession for a woman?
Good question, and very often reiterated in all NCERT books, because it's regarded as you're going to go to school with your children, and teachers very often, more often than not, is a school teacher. And the amount of work that the school teacher, I'm also amazed, has to do, get back work at home also, is much more than we as, in colleges and universities have to do. I don't know why it's drawn out, but it's regarded as something which is, part of the nurturing thing. In fact, there was a UGC NET question, there was a lot of uproar over it a few years back, which spoke about teachers are the options were nurturing and, giving, hence they have to be women. So this is something which is reiterated, and there was a lot of uproar over this question when it came in, and we were, asked about it, and whoever said the paper obviously was of that mindset as well as, what you're kind of questioning. So I don't know where that comes from, but very often that is regarded as something, and you'll have a police person will always be a man, a teacher would be a woman, which is worrisome. To me, it's worrisome. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Professor Bulbuldhar James, ma'am, for such an invigorating and relevant session and sharing with us myriad perspectives on gender and human rights. We couldn't have had a better start to the gender studies course. In these times, there's an urgent need for all of us to rethink and reimagine the gendered connotations of human rights framework, which you mentioned in your presentation, for both academic and field purposes. I'm sure the students have a lot to take away from this session. We will share the video that you were trying to, short film you were trying to play. We will share it with the students. So, and also a big thank you, ma'am, despite being unwell. I wish we could have seen you on screen. The students would have loved it.